There's a movie 2011 called Moneyball, and in this movie, it truly depicts what we're going to be looking at today. What happens in the movie is the general manager, Billy Beane, has just come off of some absolutely outstanding results. He loses a few key players, and he begins to set out saying, I need to replace my key players. So as he does this, he begins to enter into negotiations with some people, and he notices in the midst of negotiations that there's a young chap sitting in the back of the room who's whispering in everybody else's ears. The negotiations don't quite go exactly how he thinks, walks out of the room, immediately finds the guy, walks up to him and says, "What were you saying in their ear? Everybody was listening to you." And he goes, "Oh no, they don't really listen to me at all." He goes, What are you talking about? He goes, "Everybody was listening." He goes, "No, they don't actually like what I have to say, but for some reason, they tend to keep me around." What is it you say that they don't like? He goes, "I tell them that their fundamental way of going about things is flawed. The way that they're going about recruiting players is completely wrong. You see, they don't understand the game of baseball." Sorry to use an American sport here, but they don't understand baseball. They don't understand how you win games. They continue to want to buy players. He said, "But if you want to win the game, you need to buy wins, not players. And to buy wins, you need to buy runs." They just paid $7.5 million for one of your players, the Boston Red Sox did. You ask me, is he worth $7.5 million? No, he is not. They're flawed in their understanding. Is he an all-star player? He's an all-star player. He's got a good glove. He can decent at getting on base, and he can steal bases. Does he contribute to runs in the game at the level of $7.5 million? No. He says, what's happening is we have completely lost control of our understanding of how we actually manage our players, and we're misjudging the way we lead our teams. As I watched this movie, I sat back for a second and I said, that in an essence is exactly what's going on with rapid growth leadership. We have completely missed the game when we think about leading for rapid growth. The places we put our money in, the places we focus in, is attempting to try to buy a player rather than coming back and looking and buying the runs. As the season plays out for them, they set a record that nobody did. They had 20, or they tied a record and went on to beat it. They had 20 wins in a row. Absolutely fantastic job. So the question, I guess, as we bring it back around to us is, if what we're doing in regards to leadership is not aligned with rapid growth leadership, what is it we need to be doing? In that environment, they were asking the wrong question. So what I want us to do today is ask the right question. So we're going to look at 4 questions. We're going to answer today, what is rapid growth? We're going to answer number 2, why is creating surplus value so important to rapid growth? Number 3, we're going to look at what differentiates rapid growth leadership. And our 4th and final question of the day is going to be, what are the rapid growth leadership capabilities? So we're going to dive into these topics. We're going to go through them fairly quickly. I wish we had a lot of time because I know we're going to get to the end of today, and some of you are going to look up and say, but how? So let's dive in. Let's ask our very first question, and that really is, what is rapid growth? As we start thinking about it, it's a term that has a fair amount of confusion, and it's an area that everybody's interested in. If I were to simplistically define rapid growth, you could argue that it's growing faster than you did yesterday, correct? So if I grew 12% year on year as my average, and I do 13%, that is more rapid than the 12% is. You could argue in that particular spectrum. However, there's a few other factors that we need to get. So in essence, we could argue that's rapid growth. But as we're sitting in the room today, that's not the type of rapid growth we're looking at. And there's other factors we need to take into consideration. The 3 factors we need to be looking at when we're coming up with our understanding of rapid growth are, A, our previous performance, correct? It's competing against what I did yesterday. I'm looking at that. B, I'm looking at general market growth. So for example, if I grew at 5% last year and the market grew at 5% last year, am I rapidly growing? I'm not. I'm growing at market rate, correct? Now this is where it gets very interesting, because in the emerging markets, there's a lot of companies that are articulating they're rapid growth companies, but what they're really doing is they're growing on the back of rapid growth in their market. So if you were in the infrastructure industry over the last 15 years, any area of this, and you were working in Dubai coming up to 2008, you grew very rapidly. Did you grow rapidly, or did Dubai grow rapidly? And did you benefit from sitting on the back end of that? So one is looking at the market growth rate. What we found out and what we all know, which I'm not surprising anybody in the room, is when the market rate drops, we get the true mirror and the true picture of what's going on. And we see whether a company truly had growth fundamentals in place. And then the third area for comparison is looking at the sector side of this. So how is the sector growing? So we're looking at how's our company, how's the market, how's our sector. Let's take Ralph Lauren Corporation as an example here. Ralph Lauren Corporation in 2005, their stock was trading at $24 a share in the summer of 2005. They were doing okay. They were well recognized. They were doing okay. They made some substantive shifts, though, and they changed their strategy, and they started moving from thinking like a regular retailer, moving into putting in place what we're going to look at, some of the rapid growth fundamentals. And they started making some very deliberate shifts and changes we'll go through. Summer of 2008, they were trading at $74 a share. So they were beginning to be recognized at this particular time as doing quite well. Attention was coming to them. Wall Street liked them. They were actually being called a darling of Wall Street in the retail sector. There was a lot of attention going on. We all know fall of 2008 was the financial crisis. Ralph Lauren took a dip for 2 quarters. Everybody took a dip for 2 quarters. Their stock value closed yesterday. Remember, they were $74 a share, summer of 2008. Yesterday, they closed at $176 a share. Their industry grew by 10% year on year, pretty much. Fashion retail's growing, luxury fashion retail's growing at a 10% rate year on year is what's going on across the industry. They went from $74 a share to $176 a share. Okay, over the last 3 years. They are doing phenomenally well. They are a picture of what rapid growth is. If I were to come back, if EMLC were to give you a baseline, we would say a baseline for rapid growth is exceeding your industry, the metric system you put in place by at least 5%. So are you growing at a rate greater than 5% of what you grew yesterday? If you're moving into that category, you're moving into the area of rapid growth. As we look today, there's going to be 2 sides we're going to look at, but they both play. Some of you are sitting in the room saying, I want to have a rapid growth business, correct? Some of you are in the room saying, we want that as the picture for us. Some of you are sitting in the room today saying, we are a rapid growth business. We've tripled 3 years in a row, and I'm being swallowed under right now, and I need to understand, what do I do about this? So as we look at rapid growth, we're addressing both sides of the equation. Whether you've been growing rapidly, and all of a sudden you know the phrase, your bottom lip's going below the waterline, and you're starting to suck water in and trying to spit out as fast as you can to survive. Some are here. Some are sitting saying, I want to move into this area of rapid growth. So we're going to address both. If we were to come back to Ralph Lauren, if we were really to look at what was going on and use that as a case study, and as we move through, what we would begin to see is they were focusing in one key area, which was they were creating surplus value. Ralph Lauren Corporation had sat back and they began to understand we have a limited amount of resources. How do we create surplus value? Now, this is an area to where in our experience, we find a lot of organizations overlook this. We talk about it at a very high level, and when we talk about it at a high level, what we're really doing is we're looking at the top line of our balance sheet, and we're beginning to do some metrics there. So we're looking and we're saying, okay, our revenue last year compared to our number of employees created a surplus value of X. And you'll start looking at annual reports, and you'll see that they do this picture. And you'll see growth in it. So we were working with one of the larger firms. Actually, we weren't working with them. We have a conversation with one of the larger firms in the region. And they said, oh, yeah, this is in our annual report. We talk about surplus value in our annual report. I said, that's great. If we were to drop down to the SVP level, and I asked them to draw it out, could they? And they kind of chuckled for a moment. They said, hold on. You want to actually go to our SVPs and you want to ask them to draw out just the diagram of surplus value. I said, yeah. I said, how many can do it? They said, maybe one, the one with an economics degree. I said, so here's my question for you. Are you creating surplus value from the way you lead, or do you have an anomaly in your market conditions or one brilliant mind in the business who's actually doing this? And I said it's definitely the latter. We have anomalies in our market condition that are allowing us to go into that picture, which brings us back to the point. This is the crux of it. If you want to grow rapidly, you have to understand what we're about to put up, surplus value. And it's not you in this room. Your organization has to be looking at this because it's at the call face of leadership to where the change is actually going to happen. So surplus value, just to walk through a very brief economics lesson, is basically what you're trying to do. Let's say that currently you have an input of 10 and you have an output of 10. All right? And you want to go to an output of 12, the general thinking is, let's have an input of 12. So if we were to come back to most businesses and we said you need to grow by 10% next year, what's the very first request that's going to come back out? Sorry? Manpower. Grow by 10%, we need more people, correct? Very logical position, everybody goes to that. Now let's ask a different question. Are you getting 100% productivity from your current workforce? No. Does anybody, I won't go to the depth. Does everybody agree with that? No, we're not getting 100% productivity from our current workforce now. Is that correct? So in that factor, I can actually, taking these two to consideration, I want to grow by 10%. If I'm getting less than 90% productivity, I actually have space with my current workforce to get more out of it, correct? So if every time I want to increase my output, I increase my input, am I a more competitive business? Sorry? No, everybody's real quiet. So either you're deep into thought, or you're very frustrated by all of the technical problems we had earlier, okay? In regards to this. No, this is pretty much common sense. But the question is, when we come down to our leadership and management, are we honing in and are we looking at this? So what it's saying is, if I have an input and an output, I'm getting X. But rapid growth, so I increase my input, this would be the natural output I come with. Rapid growth is, though, it's getting into this space, the creating surplus value. It's saying, what additionally can I extract from my input to give me a greater output? This is the crux of what's going on. So when we look at leadership, what we're going to be talking about is how do we move in this direction? How do you get more out of a person than you're currently getting from a person now? If I were to go back to the movie, that movie, it is a cinema case study of rapid growth. They hired a Yale economist to run data. The Yale economist figured out that they were missing 75%. So first swing, they missed it 75% of the time. So he said, don't swing on the first ball. Makes sense, correct? Now, if we take that into the workplace and we step back, and if we're actually looking at data and we're going, you know, in a simple, sorry, because you're sitting here, in a simple retail environment, okay, if you smile and shake a hand, the rate of sales doubles, what would you do? Smile and shake hands. It's not rocket science, right? But yet we don't put these pieces in place. We talk about them some, but we don't put the metrics behind it to really understand what is it that makes the difference. So getting into here, you have to step back and you really need to look at your business and say, what is it that really does make the difference? Is it doing more of the same or doing something very different? And the differentiation when we get into rapid growth leadership is what we're going to look at now. This doesn't matter whether you're an Emirates airline who's growing rapidly, whether you're Jameer that's growing rapidly, whether you're any of the family businesses here, or whether you're a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble, or whether you're American Express, HSBC, it doesn't matter who you are in this picture. When you come down to it, you're looking at the same element. Unilever wants to shift to where they're going from 54% to 75% of their revenue coming from emerging markets, without hurting what's going on in their established markets now. That would be a rapid growth scenario. Emirates, who's up on the screen right now, who's looking to double their headcount in the next 6 years. That is a rapid growth scenario, going from 45,000 employees to roughly 80,000, so not quite doubling, is a rapid growth scenario. Many of the businesses here have huge growth ambitions, But the natural assumption is, let's do more of exactly how we're doing it as we go on. Let's continue to replace this, to repeat this. But what we need to be looking at is doing some things differently. So the key things we need to do, if you were to run through the list, is we need to move from motivation to inspiration. We need to move from operational leadership to scalable leadership, from staffing positions to driving productivity, and I'm going to walk through a few of these, from replicating quality to accelerating improvement, from working in silos to winning together, and from uniformity to unique innovation. I would ask the question here today, if you were to look down the left-hand side of that, how many of our businesses are sitting on that side? And I would ask how many of us were actually sitting on the right-hand side. And it would be a very interesting piece to go through and to rate where you see your business on this, and then to look at the rate you're growing at. If you happen to want copies of this afterwards, just send me an email, and I'm glad to send these to you. But I want to hone in on just a couple of these that really make a difference, specifically operational leadership versus scalable leadership. What we tend to do, and there's really good reason for this, we tend to focus very much on the operational side of the business. We look at perfecting our operations on that side. Why? Let's look logically at a large portion of our workforces in the region are comprised of engineering backgrounds, correct? So when we have engineering backgrounds, we have a tendency to gravitate more towards the operational side of the business. Now let's go a little bit further than this. Let's actually walk back in history a little bit. Let's go back through where modern day management started. All right? And let's look at the relationship to that to where we are today. Does anybody know where modern management theory and thinking started and when? Sorry? At the very popular, Drucker was involved in it, but the very popular, yeah. Sorry? Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit more into the future than that. In Ohio. Yeah, started largely, if we were to look back at any of the major management theories, they make a beeline back to the Ohio State studies. So if you were to look at any one we have today, you will see references to this thing called the Ohio State Studies. So it's clear to say you're right. Sloan, Drucker, a few that preceded the Ohio State Studies were the genesis of the thinking. But when it came to the fruition was in Ohio State in the late 40s and the early 50s. So I have a question for you. What's similar about Ohio? Okay, let me back up. Okay, I should do a reference here. Ohio is a state in the U.S. For all of us who don't know that, I need to back up a little bit. And it's pretty much right in the middle of the U.S., okay? So if you were playing a game of darts, just slightly missed the middle of the U.S. to the right-hand side, you're going to hit Ohio. So what's similar about Ohio and Dubai? Not much? Okay, not much at all. It would pretty much probably be correct. What's similar about Dubai 2012 and Ohio in 1950? Sorry? Maybe. I'm going to come back and say not much on steroids. Okay, there's virtually no consideration at all. Let's go through this, okay? Ohio 1950s, to use a very kind of slang American term, was lily white. Okay, so here you are, you had blonde hair, blue-eyed, all fair-skinned people. The lily whiteness extracted all the way down to everybody wanted a white house with a white picket fence, okay, in the 1950s. A major event in the world had just ended called World War II, okay, in the decade before. All of these soldiers came back home. They went into manufacturing, and in the manufacturing industry with ex-military people, they said, we have an issue here. We want to drive more productivity out of our people. So they went in and they began to do studies and they began to look at it. And what they did is they operationalized the way management was done. From the operationalizing of management came, we learned how to lead operational leadership. And the science side of management came to be. Now, when we look over here, and now we're dealing with huge levels of complexity, large amounts of ambiguity, growth trajectories that completely outstrip what's going on in the rest of the world. For those of you who are in a multinational, okay, and I'm going to show of hands on this, how many of you have a growth expectation on you that exceeds your the company's global growth expectation? So as we're looking across the region, several hands are going up for the multinationals saying, and I know where some of you work. So Standard Chartered, we're expecting more growth out of the Middle East than we are expecting from our global growth at the same level. Is that exactly what's going on? So you're working in an environment, not only is it different, they're saying we want something different from you as well. We want a lot more. So when we come back down and then we get pushback from the global headquarters says, here's your operational approach. Here's how you need to do it. And you're going, there's a small problem. You ask for this, but you're telling me to do it this way. Anybody experience that one? They want something over there, but they're saying, but do it this way. And you're stepping back and saying, well, come on, guys. That operational approach, what you're doing is you're stripping out the touch of the people, and this is true. Operational management strips out the proximity with the people, but the proximity with the people is where the difference actually comes in regards to the impact on performance. When you manage through a process, a performance management process, okay, that does not necessarily result in performance improvement. When you manage through email, it does not result in increased productivity. The change of the workplace happens life on life, and there's a very good reason for that. That is where we're actually seeing the work happen, and we can take an active role to make the business better. If we increase proximity meaning basically I can touch your hand, okay? If I can get into this distance with you, I will get more result out of you than when the distance is greater. Fair? So far, I'm hoping this makes sense. The difficulty is rapid growth leadership is not about a new formula or a complex formula. It's actually about doing all of the things that we know to do that we don't do. Is really where we're going to get into. Scalable leadership, on the other hand, is figuring out how do we replicate the leader's abilities to go into different locations. So if I am, and I will pick on, there's a brand here that's expanding globally, Jumeirah. Jumeirah has functioned largely in the Dubai market with a little bit of growth outside. If you look at their growth ambitions now, they're largely outside. Fair? The question now moves from how do we become operationally excellent to how do we scale our leadership and really drive it forward, keeping the hallmarks alive. This is not complex, but it's really the essence of what's going on. It comes down to how do we lead. The next one on there that I want to highlight, and then we're going to move on to the final part that really matters, is in regards to looking at replicating quality to accelerating improvement. It's one thing to say, what's our quality standard? It's something very different to say, how do we make it better? How do we continue to focus getting it better and better and better? And as I go into this, you are operating in the toughest environment in the world when it comes to replicating quality. There is definitely a difference in regards to the quality standards around the world. Everybody agree with this? Most everybody in the room, as I'm looking around, has a pretty standard approach to our understanding of what quality is. If we were to go 2 levels below us in the workforce, is the quality standard and understanding the same? What do you think? Not at all, is it? So as we move down and we get into the level of understanding, it changes. So what do we do about it? So we say it needs to be it needs to be quality, okay? And then we say it's slower and louder. No, it needs to be of quality. And then we conclude, he can't give me quality, so I will do it myself. It's a very true picture. You're saying, yeah, as you're going through this. We've seen it over and over and over. This needs to be a quality document. I hand it to you. It comes back to me. And I'm like, that's not quality. I said this needs to be quality. I hand it back. It's not a quality. I say, heck with it. He can't give quality. I do all of the work myself, and I continue to focus in that area. It goes back to the point above it. Proximity on leadership, though, is standing back and understanding what I'm looking at is saying, give quality. I should change the picture, bringing this one in to say, how can you make what you just did better? How can you improve that? I can teach you what quality is for me, or I can challenge you, make it better, and put in place the actual behavior I want to see in you over time. The behavior I want to see is not just your ability to do quality. The behavior I want to see, if I want to grow rapidly, is you understanding get better, better, better. So the natural conclusion in a management book is sit down, coach him, explain quality is X, Y, and Z. This is exactly what I'm looking for. What you're really doing is you're reinstilling what he already knows. Give the boss back what the boss asks for. Correct? That's all I'm really asking him to do in this equation. Do I want him always to do that? If so, that means I'm always dependent upon my level of thinking and my ability. So every time an issue comes up, if I want it better, I have to come back down and sorry, what's your name? Iyad. I have to sit down with Iyad and I have to say, Iyad, now here's the new way the boss wants it today. Can you make it the new way, Iyad? In that scenario, we're not going to grow rapidly. What we need to be doing is saying, Iyad, how can you make it better? He may not get it in the first 1, 2, or 3 tries at the level I want it, but I'm beginning to build in him the thinking of make it better, make it better, make it better, make it better. That's when we now move from replicating quality to accelerating improvement. So I guess the question comes down to, and it really says, what are the rapid growth leadership actions? Jim Kroenke was a leader in General Electric, and he got a dog of a project, okay? He got thrown into the plastics business, which was the worst performing business in General Electric. So here he is, he's made the global head of plastics, the single worst performing business in GE. Now, if you know much about GE, if you're the worst performing business in GE, you know that every single spotlight is sitting on you right now and watching what's going on. And all of your institutional investors also now know your name, are very aware of who you are basically pushing aside the CEO, and they're honing in and they're going, you're the weak part of the balance sheet, you're the weak part of our investment, let's watch what you're doing as well. And to make the scenario even worse, in their annual report, they have said, we have put him in the role to turn the plastics business around. So here's a guy walking in to take over a plastics business that he has to turn it around. The world's watching, and the pressure's a bit high. And we also know if he doesn't, he's pretty much going to be, he may stay in GE, it may not, but the plastics business definitely is not going to stay in GE's portfolio if he doesn't turn it around. Fair? GE is going to put it on the market to sell it off. Interesting enough, he takes it from being the dog of the balance sheet to turns it around to making it the fastest growing business in GE. How? He puts these actions into place. These are not the set of actions that he articulates. These are actions that we know, but when we look back at the case study, we can actually see there. He comes in and he demonstrates breakthrough thinking. He is quick to go in and to properly analyze the problem and get to the core issue. He's not looking at it saying, let's buy more players. He's coming in and saying, let's buy more runs. How do we actually get down to the level of buying the run? He's going in, he's analyzing the real problem, going to the real issue, and coming into it. From my experience, I've been doing this for 22 years, I think, and get the privilege of working with a lot of different organizations and seeing inside them. This is the area to where, whether you're looking at rapid growth leadership or high performance leadership, clearly makes the difference. You can see it in their case studies. You can see it in their practices. You can also see it in all of the research and the literature side. However, it's the piece that I see the least of in practice. I see time pushes us beyond actually stopping for a moment and really saying, let's analyze this issue. I've sat in strategy workshops and board meetings and watched companies literally debate and discuss issues, and I'm going, if you fix this, you just spent 4 hours on this, if you change this at all, will there be any difference in the business? And I kind of step back when you ask that question, and they look and they think for a moment, no. And we give our mental energy and we really dive into areas. If I make the subtlest change here, will it do anything for the business? Rather than getting down to the bottom line. Consistently, we hear, okay, in one-on-one, companies say, I'm not satisfied with the capability of my business. All right, probably if I took each of you to an individual coffee and sat down and said, tell me about your business. So we got into a dialogue. Each of you would articulate at some point, I'm not thrilled with the depth of capability we have in our business. You can see where it's not at the level you would want it to be, especially for the expats in the room when we ask the question, if you have worked for, not necessarily related to an expat, if you have worked for your same company outside, and we come back and say, so tell me what it was like in Australia, is it the same? You say no. Okay, we hear that, and that's not putting down the local market, okay, whatsoever at all. I'm looking at the complexity of working in regards to over 200 nationalities in a workforce. That has some factors in it we need to think about. So consistently, we hear that. But yet, I don't read it in board papers. I don't hear it discussed in management meetings. I hear it complained about, but not made as an action item. And when it becomes an action item, it's kind of, well, yeah, let's focus on HR training. This isn't about HR training. What we're really getting into is back to that proximity side, getting close enough and saying, how am I going to improve your capability? And much more importantly, how am I going to hold the managers accountable for the capability improvement? The thinking side of this is coming down and looking and saying, how are we going to do this? What are our real issues? What do we really need to be focusing on, and how do we do it? The other two that I want to pick up here are influential communication and building confidence. Influential communication is probably the hardest issue in this room. I'm going to come back to, I have said repeatedly, I've written about this in the articles in the National and other places I write, the GCC has the greatest management challenge of modern day business history. I have absolutely zero hesitation making this phrase. It's the greatest management challenge. And why do I say that? There are more nationalities in the workforce in the GCC than the United Nations has member countries. Okay? Does anybody here work for the UN before I go on this story a little bit? Okay. And edit this out of this video at the end of the day. Would you hold the UN up as a well-run company? And as being extremely effective in their output and what they're doing, and yet we get to work with even more than they have when you look at the complexity of it and you look at the workforce. On one side, we celebrate the diversity, which we should, but when we get to the other side, it brings up huge levels of confusion. And when we get to the crux of communication is when we get into the core issue of this, how we communicate, our understanding of terms, language we're using is where we get into the crux of it. I mean, I was sitting there, it's quite funny, actually. I'll tell a brief story on this. I'm okay on time, right? Okay, I'll tell a brief story on this that really drives the point home. There's hundreds of these I could tell, but in our villa, our windows open like this and this, okay? So we open one up, and then the wind inevitably closes the window. I'm sure several of you have this issue. So the worker comes into the house, and my wife turns to him. I have absolutely no idea why she thinks she's going to be able to communicate this scenario well, and says to him basically, when you should put a stopper in the window. It should be built with a stopper to hold the window open. And he looks at her with all sincerity, like you have to be the stupidest, dumbest woman I've ever met in my life. So here is probably a 20-year-old from the subcontinent coming in, and she said he literally just looks at her like, you are an ignorant woman. She says, no, madame, not like that at all. And she's thinking, why? He goes, no, you open both windows. Wind blow this way, open this window. Keeps it open. Wind blow this way, open this window. Keeps it open. And she's looking at him like, you have to be stupid. So she tries this out, goes home, opens the window up. The wind's blowing this way. She opens this window instead. When the wind changed directions, do you know what happened? The window reopens the other direction. So here she's looking at one type of solution, communicating in one way with one element of logic, and he's going, you have no clue what I'm dealing with. A couple of you heard the story, but it really drives the point home in regards to this idea of influential communication and multicultural communication, and really coming down to the crux of life, and I'll tie it into management. I was in Jeddah one day, and I was going to meet Savola Oil, and I was at the Hilton Hotel, and I remember ringing up the VP there who I was going to, and I'm like, now, how do I get there exactly? He goes, you're going to take a taxi, right? And I said, yes. He goes, okay. What I want you to do is go downstairs, just jump in a taxi, all right, and tell him to go to the roundabout where there's the empty field next to where the toy store used to be, where the big building next to that. So that I'm like you, I'm holding the phone, and I'm waiting on the laughter. And he doesn't laugh. And I'm thinking, is he serious? Sorry, Mohammed, what was that again? So he repeats, go down, just get in a taxi, go out of the hotel, and tell him to go to the big building next to where the empty field is by where the toy store used to be. I'm like, you're sure? There's no other directions. There's nothing at all. Now, in my head, I have a very particular type of communication, understanding, direction, the way the whole system works. So I go down the stairs, having traveled a lot internationally. I get up to the car. I know if I ask that question, the answer is going to be yes, because we're getting into the area of honor and shame coming into the business. The natural answer is yes. Even if I have no idea where you're going, I don't tell you that till I'm lost. We've all had that experience in the taxi, right? So I'm thinking, let's start with a step of logic prior to this, and I'll ask, how long have you been here? If he hasn't been here for a long time, there's no way in the world he's going to know where an empty field is next to where the toy store used to be and a big building nearby. So as I'm asking, how long have you been here? He says 6 months. I quickly do the math. That means 3 months at best. And as that's being said, the bellman of the hotel shoving me in the car, closing the door, and we're heading out. I'm sitting in the back seat of the taxi. We're heading out. You sure you know where? And I'm repeating the whole instructions again. We come to the first roundabout. Is this it? No, sir, I know where it is. We're going on the next roundabout. Is this it? Are you sure? No, sir. And now his head, is doing what I wish I could do, but I can't do. Okay? And at that moment, I'm going down the road. I'm sitting in the car, and I'm forgetting what yes is and where I came from, what no is, where I came from, because I'm trying to figure out, is he saying yes, I really understand? No, I don't understand. I'm sweating worse than I am sitting here right now today. I'm going down the road. I'm thinking there's no way in the world we're going to make it to this meeting. Not a chance in the world. Finally, we get to a roundabout. We come up. I've given up. I'm sitting back in the car saying, forget the meeting. Thank God that I am in Saudi right now and they're okay with me being late for a meeting, is what I'm going through in my head. The meeting won't start on time anyway. As we come around and we pull straight up to the building, he's like, here you go, sir. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, why didn't he just say it's the 7th roundabout? That would have been much easier to understand, just simply saying it's the 7th roundabout. But it's the way we communicate, the style we use, what we're comfortable with. Now, think about how many times in business we give direction, we communicate in one way, and the other person's looking going, I don't have a clue what you're saying. I have no clue. And there's a study that I just read this past weekend that I think brings it to life. So the global multinational, and this was a native English speaker, realized that every time he walked in, when you're walking in a room, you can tell conversations going on. Every time he walked in the room and there were non-native English speakers in the room having a conversation, when he walked in, they stopped speaking. So he's recognizing that this is going on. And at first he goes to the natural thing, oh, they're giving respect to me because I'm the perceived person of authority, et cetera. And he realized that's not it whatsoever at all. The reason they're stopping speaking is two non-native English speakers speaking English together in this business, they had come to realize that it's okay for them to butcher the English language. It's fine to make mistakes as they're speaking English. It's fine for them to speak in the English they had created as the common language. So somebody from Korea speaking with somebody from Mexico, they were okay with this. But when the English speaker walked in the room, they were like, but we're not speaking at that level. And they also found out immediately at the moment that when the actual native English speaker started speaking their English, they didn't understand what they were saying. They understood the Korean, Mexican company version of English, but they didn't understand. They would say things like, straight from the horse's mouth. What horse? And they would speak very rapidly, like I am doing today, and apologize for. And I know I've used a few even American phrases in here today. And they were doing this, and they realized there's a huge problem. He went back and figured out that there's only 1,500 English words that need to be used in business for proper communication. and coming back and looking at influential communication. And I'm sitting here looking at this and thinking, that's probably something every one of us should put in place in our business, because when we start communicating and trying to drive rapid growth, we're communicating in a language that doesn't make any sense at all. I'm still convinced that 2 levels below us have no idea what a KPI really means. Did you get your KPI set? How are you doing on tracking on your KPIs? What do you mean tracking on a KPI? What does this really mean? What time am I supposed to be done? In 2 minutes. I'm going to tell 2 stories, okay? Late 1990s, I showed up into Beirut, Lebanon. Now, unfortunately, I was wearing a pair of khakis, tennis shoes, and a polo shirt, which I realize now is the definite way to get a lot of attention in Beirut, which you shouldn't be wearing. But I was dressed very American at the time. I dropped down, and if you know Beirut at all, I'm in an area of Beirut called Verdun. Now, growing up, I had been taught when you leave the hotel, you circle where the hotel is on the map, so you know where you're going. So I drop down into Beirut, I pull open this big map, because I know where the hotel is on the map. I don't know where I am, but I know if I can figure out where I am, I can get to the hotel, correct? Very logical system for using a map. So here, are you from Beirut? Yes. Okay, so you can pretty much guess what's about to happen. So here I am standing with this map. I'm being a very smart person, taking every lesson that my father taught me and I learned in Boy Scouts and putting them into action. And I call the guy over and he looks at it and I said, hey, can you tell me where we are? Now, the story I'm going to tell, that's going to take a minute or so to do, happens in seconds. So as this is happening, an American holding a big piece of paper on the corner of Beirut definitely draws some attention. So as Ali's coming up and I'm asking him to show me where we are, several other guys are herding in as well. So I have an audience now, okay, that has come around to watch this equation. So Ali says to me, what's that? So I think, like a typical person, I will teach him what a map is, not realizing that my objective is to find out where I am on the map. So I begin to explain to Ali it's a map and going on through the whole story of what's happening on it. And I said, so a map shows you how to get from where you are to where you're going. Now, what was my original question? Ali, where are we? Okay? So I say to him, a map shows you how to get from where you are to where you're going. He says, that's great. Where are we? And at that particular moment, I realized that maybe maps aren't used a lot in Beirut. And as time goes by, I realized that maybe maps aren't used a lot in the Middle East. As time has gone by, I've realized that east of the Mediterranean, maps aren't used. So that somewhere comprises about 3.5 to 4 billion people don't use a map. But yet, us smart leaders walk in and we talk about strategy maps. The concept of a strategy map is based upon, what's that 3-letter word at the end? A map. So we have taken things out of one particular culture, built them into our business systems, and we wonder why we don't get the rapid growth we're after. Rapid growth leadership is about reframing the way we're doing it, thinking differently about what we're doing, putting some common pieces into place and putting them into action. The movie Moneyball ends with something very specific and very, very interesting. When Peter turns back to Billy Beane, the general manager, and he says, you know what you have just done is going to frustrate the entire industry. And as I think about that for a moment, rapid growth leadership is going to frustrate nearly every leader and manager in your business because we're accustomed to operating one way. But yet we need to be leading an entirely different way and giving our focus in other areas. So the question is, we're walking out of the room that comes back to us. If you're sitting here today thinking, I want to have a rapid growing business, think about it long and hard, because it's not going to be as easy as it looks on the surface. If you're in the midst of it now, good luck.